Okay, hey everybody, this is Peter Catalano. Welcome to the interview. As you know, I love meeting wonderful professionals, business owners, people who work for great business owners, all in the Houston area. And today I get the privilege of meeting with Cassandra Walsh. Now, here's why it's a privilege for me. As a financial advisor, I love working with other professionals, especially professionals who really know what they're doing. And if you know what I mean by that, then not everybody knows what they're doing. Cassandra knows what she's doing. So this is a treat for me to be able to work with a business transactional attorney and share with you some insights from Cassandra, because that's what Cassandra does. She is in the business transactional realm. And as you well know, if you're in business, you know stuff happens. And if you're smart, you'll put things into place prior to them happening. But a lot of times Cassandra's called in because things were not put into place prior, and now she has to clean it up. So Cassandra, I hope there was a fair assessment of what you do here. Thank you for joining me on the interview.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, more than my pleasure. Thank you for being here. So real quick, I'd like to give everybody a little bit of a personal side. I know that you coach softball, you've been in business a long time, but give our viewers a little bit of the personal Cassandra.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. Well, thanks again for having me. My name's Cassandra Walsh, and I'm an attorney with Adams and Reese. That's what I do for a living, right? I practice law, and I'm a lawyer. So that's kind of my day to day. When I am not working, I love to fish. I have a boat that sits in Clear Lake, and I try to get out on it as frequently as I can, even when it's freezing cold out, like on Sunday when we were cruising around in 45-degree weather, bundled up. I have two little sweet, cute golden doodle puppies. They are brothers. They are 4 years apart in age, but they're the light of my life, and they're so fun. So I love to play with them and get out as much as I can out to the, anywhere near the water that I can be fishing, have them off the leash and just running around and having a good old time. I am not from Texas originally. I was born in New Jersey. And I don't like people to know that because I don't want anyone in Texas to know that I'm secretly a Yankee. But I actually grew up in South Florida. I went to school in Georgia. I played softball my whole life, all through college, played softball at Emory University. And I got to Texas as soon as I could, as they say. So That's me. And here I am 10 years later, loving every minute of it.
So glad that you're here and so glad you're doing what you do. So let's talk business transactions. Let's get into some of the meat of this. I know it's near the end of the year. For those of you wondering, this is close to Christmas in December of 2021. And Cassandra, this is unrehearsed and we don't edit any of this, and that's okay. That's the way it goes. So, and none of these questions I've given you in advance, in case anybody's wondering. But, what would be the number one thing somebody going into business? Let's start at the beginning stage. Somebody's going into business and, do they need a transactional attorney or not? So where should somebody start? What would you say is the starting point from a legal perspective?
It's interesting that you asked that question. I think I have a little bit of a sensitivity to the answer to that question based on some recent experiences and some transactions we've closed recently. So one of the things that I think is really important to really think about from the outset when you're starting a business is making sure that you're setting up the correct foundation for yourself. So what that means to me is a lot of times folks will start a business and they'll wonder, should I form an entity, right? And if I do form an entity, should I do it on my own just by reading the instructions on the Secretary of State's website? Should I use LegalZoom, or should I get a lawyer? Kind of like, how does that play in from a cost benefit standpoint? And then if I do that, or even if I don't, am I taking the right steps over the course of time, making sure that I'm what we call governing the entity correctly? So if the company's taking action, are we having a meeting and a vote on it, or are we doing resolutions? Do we have a set of rules like an operating agreement or a set of bylaws or a company agreement? And just kind of what does that all look like? And are we making sure that we have that solid foundation and managing and governing things correctly over the course of time? And the reason that's important is that if you ever do get to the deal stage down the road, right? If you started this company in the 80s, you set it up on your own, maybe you did a couple of little meetings here and there, and maybe you didn't. What's it going to look like when you get to that sales stage down the road and your company's selling for millions and millions of dollars, but it turns out that you didn't really maybe govern things correctly, and we don't really know who owns how many shares or who owns what percentage of membership interest and what that all looks like. So I think that's probably the one biggest thing is when you're starting out, really think about, should I form an entity? And then if I do, am I governing it correctly? Because how's that going to accomplish what I need to down the road?
So what I'm hearing there is really important. I appreciate you bringing this up. It's not just the entity, it's not just the LLC or the shell, the paper shell from a liability protection standpoint. It's managing the business properly. I love the word you use, governing. It's making sure that you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's as you go around from a legal perspective. Let's jump a little bit here, and we're sitting midstream now. We've had this business a few years. Market's been good. Business is kicking up. Let's pick on manufacturing, just for the fun of it. So now, where's the legal step come in from let's go down the employee road. That's always my favorite subject, not. So, where does the legal come into play from that perspective? We got to hire 10 employees now, or we started adding 3 or 4 people on. We got to add more.
That's a loaded question. But where it becomes interesting, a handful of topics come to mind from a legal perspective. In no particular order, one of the things that I think business owners should think about really early on before they ever hire folks is making sure that they have a robust employee manual that's in place, or an employee handbook. Just kind of stemming similarly from a recent transaction that we closed. Let's not take manufacturing. Let's take a technology development company.
Okay.
If I'm developing software, for example, and I'm hiring a bunch of people to come along and participate in that with me. Well, if I don't have potentially an employee handbook in place, or maybe a work for hire agreement in place with these people, do they own the technology that they created, or does the company own the technology that they created? And then when I get to the sales stage, is that going to become an issue? Because if it's really that technology that my company owns potentially that's valuable, but it turns out that maybe somebody else has an interest in that, or could potentially own that if we didn't properly document that, that can be a real issue. So thinking through those types of issues are really important. And then, of course, just being familiar with your kind of state law with respect to employment. What kind of taxes do you need to withhold? Should they be brought on as actual employees? Should they be brought on as independent contractors? How do you document that? What does that actually look like in the state that you're operating in? And is it different if you operate in different states? So if we sit in Texas and you've got people sitting in Texas, you may have certain tax obligations. If you have entered into this kind of remote setting that a lot of companies have entered into, and now you have someone sitting in Massachusetts who's working for a Texas company, do you have to tax them differently? And what does that look like? And so those are probably 2 that come to mind. I probably could go on and on and on because it's a real loaded topic, but those are 2 real big ones.
Well, and I think that leads us to the statement, I hope you come back. And, in the future, maybe we can drill down on some of these topics, because I realize this is the first time we've spoken, and, it's good to have a general overview here. And then for the sake of time, I try to keep these real short, as people know. So what would be a final thing you would say to let's go down the later stage, to the business owner who's now considering exiting? What would you say to somebody like that that's just starting to come into mind? Hey, maybe I'll need to exit in 5 years, or maybe it's time for us to move this ship on. What would you say to somebody in that realm, to just the starting process, not to be a loaded question?
Yeah, that's another loaded question, because the exit could really take place in probably one of 2 ways. There's kind of a coined a mentality that when you're starting a business, you should also be thinking about your exit also from the outset. And
I
so
believe.
on one hand, one of the things that folks should probably be thinking about is succession planning, not necessarily in the context of a sale potentially, but what if something happens to me? What if I can't run this business anymore? Or what if I just don't want to anymore? Am I cultivating talent of folks who could actually rise up and take on and, you know, move forward with the company in the way that I envision it, or maybe a new way that is going to still be successful? Is there a family member who may have the desire and the ability to take it on? And also kind of how do I have that documented and how's that going to look kind of moving into that? On the flip side, if you're thinking about an exit from a sale perspective, you know, am I going to continue my employment with the company? Also, just again, I mean, what am I doing now to make the company look attractive? And that goes back to that governance issue. Sometimes there can be things that pop up in due diligence that are discovered that make the company look kind of disorganized or messy. Maybe your books aren't kept correctly. Maybe you don't have, you know, all of your kind of ducks in a row, as you say. And so what can you be doing to just make sure that stuff looks really, really, really clean, so that when that buyer comes along and they're engaging in due diligence and they're reviewing all of your legal and financial documents, do they think, this isn't going to be a good situation for us? Or do they think, this is a well-run company and this is a company that I really think that we could do something big with?
Excellent. Excellent. I appreciate that. Well, sake of time, we're going to move on here. Cassandra, how do people get a hold of you? What's the best way to reach you?
Again, my name is Cassandra Walsh, and I am with a law firm by the name of Adams and Reese. So we have a website, www.adamsandreese, it's REESE.com. I can also be reached by phone anytime at 713-308-0133. That's my direct line. And I also can be reached by email, my full name, Cassandra.Walsh@arlaw.com.
Perfect. Well, Cassandra, thank you so much again for being with me here today on the interview. And I hope you come back. We can dive into some deeper subjects here, because operating within the law and understanding the law is critical for any business out there. So again, thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.